Hello, and welcome to this video on understanding and managing children's anxiety. Before I talk about anxiety, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how children communicate through their behaviour. So one of the key things for us to be aware of is the difference between how adults and children communicate. So if you think about us as adults, if we're a bit stressed, a bit worried, a bit anxious, we can talk about how we feel if we choose, and we can ask for support because we have the language to be able to do that. We also have the cognitive understanding, where if we feel quite anxious or worried, we may know why we feel like that. And even if we don't, we know that things generally pass and that we won't feel worried forever. So those are two key things that we have as adults: language and cognitive understanding. Children don't have those things in the same way because they don't have the same language skills as adults, so they're not always able to talk about how they feel. And they don't have the same cognitive understanding, so they don't know why they feel like they do. So in terms of anxiety, that means that feeling anxious is actually really terrifying for children and really overwhelming. Because if we imagine feeling anxious and not having the language skills to talk about it or to ask for support, and not understanding why we feel like that, that would actually feel really, really frightening. So I'm just going to look at this classroom here that I've got set up. So these children here are all in a class together. The teacher's just doing some input on the carpet. So the behaviours that we see are possibly quite common in classrooms. So this child here appears to be looking at the display board. There's a child here maybe hiding under the table. A child here fiddling with their shoe, and a child over here fiddling with the pot of pencils. That isn't to say that these children aren't listening, but what it's showing us is some very common anxiety behaviours. And anxiety is a feeling of worry or fear that's often experienced as a combination of physical sensations, so perhaps having those feelings in our body, and thoughts and feelings. And what can happen is that children will have these feelings and actually show them through their behaviour rather than talking about them. So we may see nail biters, we may see children that are people pleasers and overly compliant, and these are all signs of anxiety. So those children who perhaps in school show that their needs don't matter, that they're always letting other children go first, maybe letting other children push in front of them. We may see children who have separation anxiety, find it really hard to separate from their parent or carer, and equally worrying about them all the time. So maybe asking, when am I going to see mum? When's it home time? So really indicating that they have a separation anxiety. Children who have an academic anxiety, so children who find it hard to actually start work, to initiate doing the task. Sometimes this behaviour can be seen as maybe a child who's avoiding, can't be bothered, being lazy. But actually, if we think about children who find it hard to start their work and don't actually produce anything or produce very little, then this may be anxiety about making mistakes or getting things wrong, because if you don't actually do anything, you can't get it wrong because there's nothing there. Also, children who are perfectionists, those children who, no matter how many times they do things, they're still not happy with it. And children who have friendship anxiety, children who are quite bossy, quite controlling, really struggle in that social relationships. So back to our children in class here and the behaviours that we're seeing here. So these are all forms of anxiety. So the child here is looking at the board. We think about maybe why that child is anxiety. Well, that board didn't look like that yesterday. It's completely different. So this child's wondering what's happened. Why is that different? Maybe for this child, actually outside of school, there's lots of inconsistency, lots of unpredictability, which makes this child feel really anxious. So therefore, to come into school and to see something that's changed can maybe make this child feel anxious. This child's fiddling with their shoes. Maybe this child's feeling quite anxious because the shoes are a bit tight, they don't fit properly, but they're a bit worried because they know that mum said they haven't got much money this month, so wondering what's going to happen about their shoes. this child over here fiddling with the pencils, maybe because actually having something to hold or to fiddle with can help them feel less worried and less anxious. So all of these behaviours that we may see may be quite easy for us to understand in terms of children being anxious, because there may be more common behaviours that we might see in terms of anxiety. But what about this child who suddenly goes over to the teacher and starts being quite challenging and quite aggressive towards the teacher? This is much harder for us to understand that this child maybe is feeling anxious, because we're looking at this child thinking he doesn't look very anxious at all. In fact, he looks quite confident enough to even challenge the teacher. But what's behind that behaviour? Why does the child feel the need to challenge and try and control? Maybe because outside of school things feel really unsettled, there's maybe lots of chaos, and what they've learned is actually I have to be in charge, I have to be in control. So thinking about all these different behaviours that we might see, and maybe some others that we might see as well, children who stare out the window, daydream a lot, maybe really disconnecting from those feelings of anxiety. These are all behaviours that the children have learned in order to try and feel safe and feel secure. So these are generally children who maybe don't feel consistently safe and secure. So in terms of anxiety, how do children learn to manage anxiety? So anxiety is very closely linked to self-regulation and impulse control. Because self-regulation is about a child being able to regulate their own stress levels. So in order for a child to be able to do that, they need to have had that experience from an adult. So if we imagine the baby that cries, the adult goes over, responds with love and concern, helps to soothe and reduce the stress levels, works out what the baby needs. And for that baby, over time, if that happens consistently, then they gradually start to be able to develop their own stress regulation system. It's like the adult has held their stress levels, and then over time the baby is able to hold some of that stress themselves. So those are the children in our schools who perhaps can manage a bit of stress, a bit of anxiety. They may ask questions, they may feel a bit wobbly and a bit upset, but they don't get stuck in it. They're able to work that out a bit for themselves. However, if the baby that cries is ignored or met with hostility, then what happens is their stress levels increase. So that baby is left trying to manage their own stress levels. So it's about how the adult responds to the baby that enables them to either develop or prevents them from developing their own stress regulation system. So what can we do for these children? How can we help them? So in terms of self-regulation, it's really important for all these children that actually what they're feeling is validated and is met with some empathy. And this can be conveyed through tone of voice, facial expression, so maybe I can see you looking at the poster. Maybe you're a bit worried because it doesn't look the same as it did yesterday. That's because I changed it. Really validating the child's feelings. I can see you hiding under the table. I'm wondering if you're feeling really worried because I've talked about us having a test tomorrow. I wonder what I can do to help. So really trying to help. Perhaps the child over here who's fiddling, acknowledging, I can see you doing that. Maybe it would help if I gave you something. So all those responses and meeting the child where they are with their feelings. They're not dismissing them, they're not criticising them, they're not discounting them. And the message that these children get is it's okay to have feelings, I can help you with your feelings. So lots of opportunities to be really calm, really reassuring. It can feel really difficult when I'm asking you to do something and you're not sure what to do, but remember I can help you with that, or I wonder what it would feel like if I sat you nearer me and then I could help you. So all of that will enable the children's stress levels to reduce, therefore reducing their anxiety, enabling them to access their learning and to feel safer and more secure. So some practical things we can do. So we could have a carpet mat for a child to sit on who's maybe finding it hard to sit still and wandering around. This is a really useful way of a child being able to get a sense of actually the area that they can sit in. And for this, you demonstrate to the child how to sit in it, ask the child to help you make it, they choose their favourite colour and stuff. And actually, the child over time is able to have ownership for this. So maybe we'll go and get it themselves, sit on it. And I've seen this used a lot in schools. And over time, the child doesn't need it. You don't make it for them in year 2 and they're still sat on it in year 6. They learn to be able to regulate that themselves. Things like a sand timer where tasks are broken down in small chunks, really useful for the child who just can't start, or the child who finds it really, really difficult to keep going. Things to hold, little finger puppets or pebbles are really good. For all of these children, The Huge Bag of Worries, one of my favourite books. So this book can be used right across the age group in primary schools. For younger children, perhaps having a worry monster, a soft toy that can just be on your desk, and talking to the children about if they feel worried at all, they can come and have that. And that's a really nice way of you being able to see actually a child feeling a bit worried, a bit anxious, and maybe not able to say. For older children, lots of really good discussions around this book. Also things like making a worry box that's on the teacher's desk that children can just put their worries in. For some children, having a worry book. Doodling's really good for children, colouring, things like that. The other thing that's really nice is for all these children, these are the children who are lacking in confidence. So anything we can do that can help them to just feel better about themselves. So the Book of Positive Things, where you and maybe another member of staff write positive things in for them every week. The book's photocopied on a Friday and they can take it home. So within all of this, being around children that are anxious, particularly when they're not able to say it, can be quite difficult for us as adults. So it's really important that you're aware of your own feelings and the feelings that can be activated for you when working with certain children and behaviours. A child who's constantly challenging you, that's really difficult to manage and to deal with. So really developing some self-awareness in terms of how you respond. Not rescuing them, not doing things for them all the time, but equally not being punitive with them. So trying to have a real understanding. These children are trying to tell us something through their behaviour. Have a network of people that you can talk to and ask for support. And it's really important that you look after yourself so that you can look after others.